friends, well, thank you so much for joining us for another amazing Q&A. I have to say, out of all the things that we do here at the Roundtable, the Q&As are probably my favorite ones because you get to know about the performance, not about the tricks. I feel like a lot of times when you go to a lecture, it's just about the tricks, right? But the Q&As are special because you get to know them. You get to know things that you didn't know about them. And last month we had Spellbinder, and the video for Spellbinder should be going up soon. The last video that I posted on our app on the group spot, it was for Paige Thompson's Q&A. So you haven't had a chance to see that, just go down the thread and you will find the link for Paige's video. And if you can't find it, just message me and I'll be happy to send it to you. Okay, sounds good. All right. This Sunday we have a lecture by Mr. Danny Rudnick, and he's hoping that you show up. Otherwise, he's gonna fail you. Jan, I've already down the road for November, we have a lecture for Mark James, and at the end of the month, we have a lecture by Francis Minari. So there's a lot of things happening on the roundtable for November, and for December, we have a couple of things prepared for you. But because it's the holidays, I don't want to throw so much stuff at you. Also, I'm working on the Secret Santa for the round table. I'm looking for the perfect day so we can host it up in the mezzanine. We'll have some food, pizza, whatever not. But if you want to be part of the Secret Santa, message me and then I'll start making a list. I think it'll be a good time. Okay, I've been trying to do other things for the round table, kind of like the barbecue that we had in the summer. Just little things to get you guys a little more excited about the round table. Okay. But with that being said, tonight I'm excited because tonight we get to ask questions to the person that makes the show happen. The one and only Jan Rose. No, thank you so much for being here, Jan. And Jan, to get the Q&A started, tell us a little about your background, where you come from, what got you into this business? What was it that you did before magic?
Oh my gosh! Wow. I grew up in a family where there was extended family. So I grew up living in an apartment building with my grandmother and grandfather owned this building. And in this building was my grandma and grandpa, and my mother and my father, and my mother's brother, and my sister and myself. So there was this extended family, and I could run around and go into everybody's apartment, and it was pretty wonderful, actually. And in that situation, that I was the youngest, and my uncle also lived in the apartment building as well, and that was my mother's brother. And my grandmother lost 3 children in between. My mother was her first birth, or my mom. And then my grandma lost 3 babies, and then my uncle was born. So there was a big difference in their age difference. And I grew up watching these people and living, and I'm sure that you know this, that as a child, your first world is your home. That's the world to you. That's where you learn how things work, and what the rules are, and who you are, and what your place is within all of those people. That's your first world. And so I was the youngest person in this dwelling, and all these people were very, very busy, and they all had jobs. My father had a job, and my grandpa had a job, and my mother worked, and my sister was always busy doing something. She's the elder sister, and my uncle was a stylist, and I wanted to figure out what was my job going to be, because everyone around me was just, and my job at home, everybody in our home had something that they had to do, and that's the way our family was constructed. That you had purpose to work and to do and to contribute to this community that we all lived in. So I spent a lot of time with my grandmother because I helped her in the kitchen, and I helped her with laundry, and so therefore I spent time with her, and I watched old movies, and old films, and I watched variety shows, because there were a lot of them back then. You know, the Dean Martin variety show, and the Carol Burnett variety show, and Red Skelton variety show, and she watched Lawrence Welk, and so I saw all of these incredible people that I sat with my grandmother and watched, and I just was so incredibly in awe of, and I wanted to be a dancer. I wanted to be an entertainer. I was very drawn to dance, and I watched shows that, you know, like the old movies with Shirley MacLaine and Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and I wanted so badly to do that, and I imitated that, and I told my mother, and I was very young, I was about 5, 6, and I told her that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a dancer. And so my mother asked her friends, you know, what do I do? You know, she keeps talking about it, she runs around the house dancing, this is something she's imitating and doing. So my mother's friends said, bring her to the Fine Arts Building, and they'll help you, you know, there. And so we lived in Chicago, in the city, so the Fine Arts Building was not far, and we went there, and I started taking ballet classes at the Fine Arts Building. And I was about 5 or 6 years old. And I have such vivid memories of walking up Michigan Avenue past the Artists Cafe, because you had to pass those big windows at the Artists Cafe, and then you went into the threshold to go into the the Fine Arts Building. And then you took your life in your hands getting in this elevator, right? That was so frightening, with the doors that had, you know, and there was an elevator operator. So, you know, and he did it, and this guy looked like, you know, 10 miles of rough road. And he was wearing a red vest that was stained and spotted, and he never could get the floor. You know, on the floor, you had to jump. You just couldn't get it flush, you know? But I have such vivid memories of going to these ballet classes, and I studied ballet, and I loved it, and I wanted to go more and more and more and more. So I started as a ballet dancer. Well, I was studying ballet, I was 5, you know, and I did that until I was about 8. And then I really loved it, and I wanted to take more classes. And so my mother transferred me to the Ruth Page School of Dance, and I studied there. And when you're there, it was a different kind of culture at that school, because it was just ballerinas at Ruth Page, and they also were very strict, very strict. You had to wear just pink tights and pink ballet shoes and a black leotard with a little small elastic around your waist. Your hair had to be pulled back, and I had really long, wild, crazy hair. So it had to be pulled into a bun, and then you put a little hairnet over it. And I was just product city. You know, back in those days it was dippity-doo, gel, whatever. But this is what you had to do. It was an incredibly disciplined form of dance, and I was a young girl. I was about 8 years old when I went there. But I loved it, and I begged to do it more and more, and you had to. The teachers told, you know, the parents of students that had potential, that if you wanted to do well, you had to be there more. So I ended up going to the studio a lot, and it was very, very difficult. But I loved going, and I loved the challenge of it. And through that studio, I started auditioning, because there was a call board, and they told you when there were auditions, and if you wanted to go, you went. And I begged my mother to go, and I said I wanted to go, and she found out the information, she took me, and I would audition for ballet companies. And I started doing that when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I didn't realize what I was getting into because you don't. You're a child, you know. And there were hundreds of girls there. Hundreds. And how do I know there were hundreds? Because when you got there, you put your dance bag in a corner and you went to a table and you gave them your name and they gave you a number. And that was who you were at the audition. It was your number. And it was maybe 169 or 250 or whatever it was, and they pinned that number to your back on a piece of paper. And that's who you were, and you had to remember your number. And then they would line you up in groups, and maybe you might get dismissed immediately because of how you looked. Maybe you were wrong for what they needed. Too short, too tall, too heavy, too young, too old, whatever. There were hundreds of girls there in the same pink tights and pink shoes and, you know, black leotard. And I did that for years without ever getting a job. But I just kept going to these auditions. And my mother kept taking me. And I went, and I went, and I auditioned, and I auditioned. They would eliminate, and they'd get you, you know, in a group, and you think, oh my gosh, maybe I'm getting closer and closer, and then you were eliminated. And finally, one year, I was about 11. I think I was about 11. I auditioned for the Ruth Page Ballet Company to be a performing member, and I made it all through the cuts, and I got in. So I began my professional career as a ballerina, and I was about 11 years old. And have any of you ever seen the movie Black Swan?
Yeah.
It was that crazy. It was that competitive, and it was that evil to be in a company like that. And again, this is what I'm so thankful for, back to the dwelling, my world of where I was raised. My mother and my family didn't treat me differently because I was a dancer or a performer. I was expected to do my chores and help my grandmother with the laundry and clean the house and do the things that I needed to do to make that apartment building go. I was expected to go to school and do all my homework on time. And I was never treated like, oh, you're an entertainer. You can be emotional because you're not, you know, you want to be a performer. That didn't roll in my home at all. What I did as a dancer wasn't any different than my sister who wanted to be in science and chemistry. It wasn't special, it wasn't different, it was just what I did. So I was raised that way, and little did I know how powerful that was going to serve me. Because that industry was very, very rough and very hard and very difficult. And as a child of 11, I was put in a group. There were two performance groups when you got in the company. The A group and the B group, they were equal in status. The A group was not better than the B group. Those were performing dancers. But then with the A group and B group was the C group and the D group, and those were understudies. And they went to every single rehearsal, and they were at every single performance. And you have to know, they were waiting for you to make a mistake because they would get your slot. Remember, there are hundreds of girls auditioning, and now they have a company of performing artists. And in my group, of my age group, of the routine and the dance that I was going to be instructed upon, we shared the performance schedule. So the first company show that I did was at McCormick Place, Erie Crown, and it was the Nutcracker Suite. And I was in that show performing for thousands of people. But performing was not scary to me. Rehearsals were. Rehearsals were grueling and they were nerve-wracking, and you always worried you were gonna get cut. If you made a mistake, or God forbid your hair wasn't perfect, you were just eliminated. And that girl from the C group, that was her lucky day. She got moved up. And every time I went to a rehearsal for the ballet company, you were on edge. It was nerve-wracking. But I did that for many years. I did that for about 3 years. And every year you had a re-audition. Every year. And if you didn't get in, you got cut. And if you got in, you were in. So I kept getting in. For 3 years I was in. And then the next year, after that 3rd year, I didn't make the cut. I didn't get chosen as a performer. And I didn't even get chosen as an understudy. So now I wasn't in the performing company anymore. But I could still train at Ruth Page. I could still go to take classes, and I did. And it was a little frustrating for me, but I had a teacher, one of the instructors, and she said to me, you know, you're not gonna be a prima ballerina, but you're a really good dancer, and you're a really hard worker. And with your personality, take who you are and take it to the theater. Learn more about dance, learn more about acting, and go into the theater. So I transferred, I still took classes here and now and then at Ruth Page, but I transferred to Lou Conti. Anybody know Lou Conti Dance Studio? So I went there, and I learned other forms of dance, and I broadened, you know, my scope of what I knew. But I was a ballerina, I had really good training, so my technique was very, very strong. And I'm incredibly thankful. I know when I came to your Q&A, you talked a lot about how your mom, you know, was very influential in encouraging you, and listened, you know, as a parent, listened to what this child was saying they wanted to do. And I was very lucky, very fortunate, you know, that my mom was like listening and watching me and allowing me to exhibit this urge that I had. So when I was at Lou's, there was a group of dancers that were professional dancers, and they were doing well, and they said, you gotta take tap, and you gotta take it from Tracy Vandehar. She's the one. Don't go to any of the other teachers, take it from her. And I didn't know what that meant. And I didn't know, and when I talked to Justin about memory, and you frequently talk about your drumming training and how that's where your mind goes in rhythm when you're rehearsing a trick. That you sometimes set a metronome, right? To rehearse to a trick. And I can't help but think that my early training, you know, as a dancer, taught me a lot about the neurological connection of learning and learning very quickly under pressure.
Right.
Because I wanted to be a performer. And in order to be a performer, you had to make the cut. You had to audition. And you had to do something that was going to be noticeable or good or better than hundreds of other girls that looked just like you and were very thirsty for a job and very good at what they did as well. When I studied with Tracy and I took tap from her, she taught in a really interesting way. She taught you how to learn the technique, right, of how to train your feet, because you have to use just your toe for the toe sound and just your heel for the heel sound. And you have to be able to spend a lot of time on the ball of your foot so that the heel sound isn't making a sound when you don't want it to make a sound. So there was a lot of time at the bar. But remember, I was a ballerina. I was accustomed to spending hours and hours and hours sweating at a bar, taking technique classes. And so that came easy for me, naturally for me. But when we got to the floor, Tracy had a way of teaching where she would teach you to hear what she was doing, see what she was doing, and then connect it neurologically to your body. And she taught you that way from moment one. So I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this to you. Has anyone tap danced?
Yeah.
Anybody in here? You have, okay. So when she was teaching a step to you, or a combination, she taught you a step because she knew you were gonna take that knowledge and you were gonna have to audition with it. And what happens when you audition? And it doesn't matter how good you are. If you can't pick up a step really fast and show them that you can do that, you're not gonna make it to cut, right? And you've all seen chorus line, right? So all these groups of dancers are getting up in front of a panel of directors and choreographers, and there's a choreographer there who's demonstrating, and you have to pick it up really fast. And you have to also perform it. You can't just like kind of slough through it. You have to look like you know what you're doing. And have style and finesse and technique and grace and poise and, right? So Tracy taught you that. She taught you that in class. She got you ready for the real world of auditioning. And she taught you by, I'm just gonna say it, is that okay? Like, I don't know if it'll make sense to you, but like, she would, while she was doing it, she would say in rhythm, toe, toe, heel, heel, push back, shuffle, but change, flap, heel, push back, flap, heel, push back, shuffle, but change. 1, 2, 3, 4. Toe, toe, heel, push back, shuffle, but change, flap, push back, right? So you, without realizing it, you were learning that. Your mind, your ears were hearing da 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 da. So you knew how that step was supposed to sound. Your ears and your brain were also learning what that step was in its minute form. It was toe, toe, heel, push back, shuffle, ball change, flap, heel, push back, shuffle, ball change, push back, shuffle, ball change. And it was for everything. Hop, shuffle, 1, 2, 3. Hop, shuffle, 2, 2, 3. Hop, shuffle, 3, 2, 3. Step, shuffle, ball change, step. So she taught you that. And so when you came out of her class, after taking classes and classes, you could go to an audition and you could compete. You could be thrown up into a situation where a choreographer would say 5, 6, 7, 8 for chop, step, shuffle, change, right? Or whatever they would say, and it would make sense to you. You could do it. Right. So when you train like that for years, little did I know that I was training neurologically to accept a lot of information very, very quickly, put it to a rhythm, and immediately apply it, and have it hold, and have it make sense. So, and I studied dance for a very, very long time, and I auditioned, early, and got out there and wanted to be a performer. And so I didn't realize, that I would use those skills later. And I didn't realize that I would kind of put that together. But then, I realized I had to be an actor, right? I had to learn how to do lines, and I had to study acting. So I studied acting, and I went to acting school. And what you do in acting school is you first learn to do monologues, and you learn to, also cold read. And cold reading is not the way we do it in...
read a script.
Right. Cold reading has a different meaning than it does in mentalism. Cold reading means that you can pick up a script and make sense out of it right away. You can cold read script. And that's what you need to do at an audition. And when I got to doing theater, you went to an audition and you got an appointment. You got 2 minutes in front of a director. Now, I was raised in the ballet world where you had to fight through 200 girls to be a name and not a number on your back. So to me, this was heaven. Heaven. To have someone pay attention to me for 1 minute. That was fabulous because of what I had done in my past. You know, going to those auditions and trying to fight through the crowd to be seen or acknowledged. So, but then I learned that when I went to an audition, there were like 30 girls that looked just like me, you know, going for the same part that I was going for. And I learned that I had to learn to do something that was gonna get attention, you know? So, because of my ballet training, I was very disciplined. And if anything teaches you to be disciplined, you know, it's being in the ballet world. You can't mess up or you're out. Your hair can't be out of place. You can't gain 5 pounds or you're out. And someone else from the C group has your spot. It's that easy. It's that fast. I saw it happen to so many friends. I saw my girlfriend lose her job because she wore bracelets and we weren't supposed to wear bracelets at rehearsal. You were only allowed to wear little tiny post earrings, if jewelry at all. That was it. You know, it was so strict and it was all about discipline. It was all about following rules. So when I got to the theater world, I could follow rules. And it seemed like those rules were easier for me because it was so strict before. And I learned monologues and I learned how to prepare for an audition, how to over prepare. And I learned that if you made it through the cut of doing your monologues and then being asked to stay to read from the script, that was a good thing, right? And so now you get to read from the script. So I trained myself during the few minutes they gave us with the script to memorize it. To memorize what they wanted me to do. Because I needed to get their attention. I needed them to think I was the one right for the job. So I would do the best I could. And I didn't care if I was 1 word or 2 words off, because I wanted to make a bold statement. And so what they would have you do is they would say, okay, we're gonna have other people come in, so take the script and then we'll call you in a little bit. So we would have a few minutes with the script. And then they'd have you come in and they'd say, take your mark, and whenever you're ready, go. So what I would do is I'd walk in the room and I'd take the script and I'd throw it on their table. I'd take my mark and I'd do the piece. And sometimes it got me a job. A lot of times it did. And it got me listed with an agency. And I learned to do that to compete. I learned to do that to get work. And I went to college and got my degree in theater. And by the time I went to college, I had a resume already. And I had some performing credits on there. And I wasn't sure if I was gonna go to college or not, but I got a scholarship. And so I went. And I was glad that I went, really glad. And when I went to college, I studied theater. I was a theater major, and I double majored. I also got a degree in psychology because of 2 things. My theater coaches were telling me study psychology because as an actor, you need that training. You need to psychologically understand the psychological makeup of your character. You need to do your script work. You need to do your actor's notebook. You need to do your backstory. You need to have your actor's secrets. And you can't construct those things unless you're smart enough to know what the psychological makeup is of the character you're playing. What are they all about? What are they afraid of? What are they hiding? So I studied psychology and I got that degree, but then my psychology professor said, oh my God, get out of the theater. And with your theater background and your dance training and your personality, you would be a great therapist for children. And you could do dance therapy, right? Dance therapy. And for kids that were abused, you know, you teach them how to express themselves through movement, and you teach them through puppetry, right? So they like people who have theater backgrounds and psychology degrees, bring those skills together, and it's a very powerful combination. If you're good with children and you want to train to get that degree, and I thought, wow, that was really interesting to me. And I thought, you know, what if I don't, you know, being in show business is really tricky. How am I gonna have a life, you know, in show business? And if I had a real job, I could have, like, I could be like the people that I grew up with in my family, back to my family. You know, everybody had a job, and people had cars and houses and families and lives because they had a job. So I really did think about doing that, becoming a therapist. But I was a good performer, you know, and I was getting jobs in college. I was getting in shows and doing well. And I had great teachers. I had great professors. And one of our professors was from Victory Gardens in Chicago. You know, Ron Herson, his name was. And he was great. And he didn't mess around with us. You know, he said, if you really want to be actors, you know, you have to, in this room, in the safety of this room, with students, challenge yourself and learn about what that means to audition and to be prepared. If we weren't prepared for class, if we didn't do our homework or be ready, how do you expect to get a job? You know, he really took it to the real world. If you can't be ready for class to get up and do a piece, or to have your character work done, or your actor's notebook, you know, you didn't work on it, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna make a living? You know, if you can't show for work prepared for school, in school, when you're taken care of, and you have meals here and a place to live. He was very honest and very open with us. And I again I'm so thankful that I had teachers like that I had a rough ballet beginning, because you get hungry and you get thirsty for wanting to do well. And you take it seriously. And you understand that if this is what you really want to do, this is your job. And you have a responsibility to be prepared, to show up, and also, you know, in the theater world, I learned how to be a community member. Because I didn't learn that in the ballet world. In the ballet world, I learned how to watch my back, and how to look for my shoes and make sure I had my dance band with me, because people were stealing each other's shoes so that you were late for rehearsal, and it was just not a community in the ballet industry. It was crazy and wild, and women and young girls, it was emotionally stressful. And I was so thankful that my dad was a very quiet person, and he was not someone that sat with me and talked about emotions. You know, my father didn't do that. But my father was an athlete when he was younger. And so he had a lot of discipline, and I learned from him. And I also learned about how to take care of my body without starving myself. And I learned how to take care of my body without taking speed. And I learned how to take care of my body without smoking cigarettes. And that was not what I learned in the Valley world at all. And that's not what I saw in the Valley world at all.
So Jan, we're understanding like, your drive that you, learned from this, but can you maybe go on to like, how you got into magic?
Well, I got into magic because after college I was auditioning and I picked up an agent. I had a couple of agents, I was not exclusive. And I was with Reese Davison, I was with Shirley Hamilton, and I was auditioning. And I got a job in Wisconsin, so I took that, and I stayed there. I stayed with a company there for about 3 years. And that was a smart move because I built my resume. Because I was a Chicagoan and I knew that in order to compete in Chicago, I needed to have a resume that was sturdy enough to compete. So I built my resume up, came back to Chicago, started performing, and I had to make a decision. I did a lot of shows and I was still dancing and still studying and still trying to make a living. But I was doing many jobs, Justin. I was working as a dancer. I was working with the Drury Lane Theater, and I had gotten in there, which was a great gig, because they had 5 theaters and they used actors and actresses repeatedly. I was also working, does anybody know Life Marketing here? Life Marketing? You know Life Marketing, Elaine Cohn. So I found out about them through the dance agency, and I was working, doing trade shows for Elaine. But I wasn't like doing like what Danny does, you know, where you're like a high profile entertainer. I was a lead gambler, you know, or I was pouring orange juice at the restaurant show.
Yeah.
Or I was swiping, so I had all these jobs that I was doing to make a living as an actor. And I needed all of them to make money. And I also knew that many of my friends were teaching dance or teaching at an aerobic studio or servers.
Sure.
But I saw what happened to them when they did that. And what happened to them is they kind of lost their spirit and their drive in the industry. So I said, you know what? I'm gonna stay really hungry and I'm gonna take jobs in the industry. I don't care what they are, but I'm gonna take those jobs because I gotta stay connected to my community. I have to hear about what's happening in the industry. I have to hear about auditions. So I ended up making a decision that I was gonna try to go equity, and I did. I got an equity job, I got my equity card, and so now I got more attention because I was an equity member. And I got insurance. Boy, oh boy, I had insurance, you know? And if I stayed working.
When was this in your life? How old?
You know
were
what?
Approximately.
Hold on just a second, because I don't know how interested you guys are in this, but I'm gonna get to the magic part really quick, because I don't want you to get bored. But my agent, I got a call from my agent, and my agent said, I have this audition for you. And I want you to go to this audition, and it's for a theater show at the First Chicago Center downtown, where the Chase Bank is. There's a theater there, where the Chagall is, you know, the Mosaic. So there's a theater down there. And you guys probably know that theater because David Copperfield did his show there. He did Magic Man. So there was an audition there, and then the show was gonna be held there. And she said, they need somebody that's really small, and they need someone that can dance and have movement training, which I did, of course. And then, but an actress, and they also want somebody that has experience with children. And I had worked with the children's theater, the Drury Lane Children's Theater, theatrical productions for children. And I did that for 4 years with a director named Travis Stockley. And it was all equity people, but we did really fabulous shows for kids. And we did them in the Drury Lane theaters. So they were beautiful and beautifully produced. So anyway, they said, you know, so I was sent on this audition, and this was the show that Dan was in. Danny, you know, somebody saw him performing. And I think they saw him like at some kids show that was for the public. And this producer from the First Chicago Center thought he was really good. And they got in touch with him and they followed him around a little bit and watched him and said, okay, we want you to do this show at the First Chicago Center. And you'll be the magician in it. But they said, but when we like your show and we like your style and we like what you're doing, but it's gotta be a bigger show. It has to have lights and sound and music, and you have to have like a person. We have to have a bigger show. Illusions. Make a show bigger. So I didn't know this, of course. You know, I didn't know any of this stuff. I just knew I had to go to this audition. So what Dan did is Danny was really good friends with Lee Levin and Michael Brandwein. Do any of you know them? Michael worked at the New York Lounge. He worked at the bar, did bar magic. And Lee worked at Julian's doing magic. But it's not all they did. Michael was a lawyer. That's what he went to school for, and that's what he did for a living. But he was a writer, and he wrote for television. And he wrote for the television show, The Magic Door. Remember The Magic Door, anybody? On TV, do you remember it? A zoom, 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 a zoom, zoom, zoom. Gilly, 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 gilly. Right? Come through the magic door. So he wrote for that show. And Michael was a character in that show. He was Mr. Letter. Do you remember Mr. Letter? Mr. Letter was a mailman, right? And so he would wear a mailman outfit. And so Tiny Tim, who was the host of the show, would say, oh, look, Mr. Letter is coming. I wonder if he has anything special for us. Mr. Letter. And he'd have his leather bag. And he'd say, oh yes, I have a letter for you. And he'd go in the bag and he'd take out the big letter L. Right? We have a letter, and it's the letter L.
Very good.
Oh, the letter L, right? Well, this was a show for Jewish children. It was a Jewish morning show on Sunday mornings. And they'd slip that in real, like, low-key. L is for latkes. Oh, we all love latkes, and L is for, Hanukkah's coming, and so they talk about, like, right? So I used to watch that show. My sister and I watched that show. Anyway, Michael wrote for that show, and Lee Levin, he was also a writer for that show. So Danny called them up. They were his friends from Magic. And he said, I need you guys, you gotta help me, you gotta write this show for me. He said, Michael, you gotta write a show, Lee, you gotta help me, and I gotta figure this out, because I don't wanna lose this opportunity, but I have to make this show big. I have to make the show terrific. So, Michael wrote a show for Danny. And so, at the audition, I auditioned for this show, and I almost didn't go to the audition. I almost didn't go, and I was telling Paige this story. Because I had a job at Columbia College. I was a reader, because on my skill sheet on my resume was quick study, cold reader. And so I got called by Columbia College, and I worked with the graduate students who were, not just me, there was a bunch of actors that got jobs. And in the writing division, being a screenwriter, these people would write scripts, but they needed to hear them come to life. So they hired actors to come in at a certain point of the semester to cold read these scripts aloud so that the students could hear their scripts come to life. So I had a job doing that, making money. Good for me, right? I do anything.
Like a pretty easy job.
You better believe it. In my jeans and my t-shirt, I went hot. You imagine me, I had my highlighters with me. And I was highlighting my scripts, and I was script reading. And I got paid for it. And I got paid to do trade shows and hand out leads. But I was with other actors,
So what compelled you to go to this?
To the audition. My mother.
Your mother.
I was having coffee with her. I was I went to her apartment, and I was talking with her, and she was asking me about my career and what was I doing. I said, well, I'm working at Drury Lane is great, and Columbia's great, and I'm doing trade shows you know, with Diana Mentz hiring me through Elaine Cohen, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that, I'm great. And then I have this audition coming up, but I don't think I'm gonna go. And Shirley called me, and Shirley was like, oh, this audition's so perfect for you. But I don't know anything about magic, and I'm going on and on and on. And my mother said, what is wrong with you? Of course you have to go. Your agent calls you. It's an audition.
Yeah.
Like you're not gonna go to an audition?
Right.
And I thought about it, and I was like, she's right. You know, the real reason I didn't wanna go, and I wasn't gonna go, was because I was afraid.
Well, yeah, I think there's a real fear if you're about to do something new, right?
Very new.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know anything about magic, so I went to this audition, I did go.
Jan, what's in the folders? Try
Bunch of scars.
So I have to show you this stuff. I have to show you this stuff because this is so funny. So I went to this audition,
I know.
and in my
Wait.
in my dance band, I brought my whole dance band because now the ballerina in me is coming out, and the fear in me is coming out. And so I have a lot of fear, and fear is a great motivator for being prepared and getting your stuff together. So I have all this stuff prepared, and I went to this audition, and when I got into the first Chicago Center, I said, wow, what a snazzy theater this is. How did I not know this is here? It's like a beautiful little theater down here. So I was real excited, and then I signed in, and I handed in my picture and my resume, and she handed me a script, and said, you'll be cold reading this script. I was like, oh yes I will. Darn right I will be. And I had a monologue prepared, and I had 8 bars. You know, you bring a song. I'm not a real good singer. So what I did to hide that is that I always danced while I sang. And I said, I'm gonna misdirect you.
We'll be the judge of that.
So I would sing something really easy to sing, like Honey Bun. You know, from,
Can we get a demo of that?
right. Tons of fun, right? I would sing that song, but I was dancing while I was singing. You better believe I was dancing. I was singing. And then I could do acrobatics, not like my daughter. I wasn't like her, but I could do a few. I could do a flip and a walkover and a back walkover and a split, and I could do a handstand, and you know, I could do a round off, and I also could do partner dancing. I was so small and I was good at that, so I could do that.
Yeah.
So I went to this audition for Dan, and I go there, and this was my introduction to meeting Michael and Lee, and then their producer people from the First Chicago Center were there, and then Dan was there. So I started out and I did like a little monologue, and then they said great, and then I did a cold reading thing with Danny. And Dan was not accustomed to working with other people. He was doing magic shows by himself. So he had 0 experience of how you work with a partner, you know? And I could tell he was like really nervous. So I really, you know, you learn as an actor, like how to make someone else feel really comfortable and how to give, you learn, like, I'm not an improv person, you know, I never studied improv, but in acting, you have to give the person that you're working with something to work off of. Even though you have lines to say, there's subtext and sub-story, and so even if it's comical and it was very simplistic dialogue, you have to help the person you're with. So I did a really good job, you know, during the audition, and there were 50 girls. Shirley Hamilton said 50 girls, and I got a call back. Now I want the role. I wanted it real bad. I read the script and I loved it. And the character was so great because, do you remember Sherry Lewis? Anybody?
Yeah.
Okay, and Lamb Chop. So I watched Sherry Lewis, but I didn't really think too much about Lamb Chop. Although I love Lamb Chop, I didn't think of Lamb Chop as a puppet. I didn't say, oh, I wanna be a puppeteer.
Right.
I wanted to be like Shirley
Wow.
Lewis, because she danced around the, remember she danced around the wishing
Yeah.
well in the beginning?
Okay.
In high heels and a dress. And I was like,
These are
man,
details.
I want to do that.
She was like, she was
But,
like, oh.
but that script, do you remember what was so interesting about Lamb Chop? And what was so earth-shattering about Lamb Chop was Lamb Chop was sarcastic. Do you
Yeah.
remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
And really mischievous. And Lamb Chop got into trouble and did all kinds of things that were kind of rude, right? And in that day and age, on TV, and at that time, that was really something for this little character. But it was terrific. Because why? Because that character was a child. Kids do that. Kids want to blurt out and say the things that seem rude, but they can't help themselves. Or burp after they eat, and Lamb Chop was a burper, right? Well, the script that I read of Danny's character, like Danny was very straight, this teaching, leading, advising magician that was so nice to the audience, right? But the sidekick, his sidekick Twinkle, was real mischievous.
Twinkle.
And always doing something like wrong and bad. And when Danny would say, don't do this, Twinkle would do it. Don't touch that, Twinkle would do it. Don't open this, Twinkle would open it. You know, and so I read that character and I just said, this is for me. And I fought really, really hard, and
After the years of servitude.
I got that
ballet.
job. I got
Well, I'm just saying, you wanted to act out this character.
Well, you know what, I really was excited about it, and I got the job. And so, these
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Twinkle.
These were promo pictures,
Twinkle and Danny Orleans.
right? So this is how young
Mhm.
we were. I
Oh
was
my God.
about 20-something,
Mhm.
maybe 24 in this picture.
Oh, wow.
And I was very, very, very small. I weighed about 88 pounds.
Oh my god.
Because I was a dancer. And so this is me on top of the sub trunk, right? Because we did a sub trunk, right? So this show was so well written. Michael did a beautiful job at writing this show. And we did 8, sometimes 9 shows a week in the First Chicago Center. They bussed kids in, and this was a show for families. On the weekend it was families, but during the week it was bus loads came in to watch the show. It was a proscenium theater, and it was one act, 55 minutes, with lights and sound, backdrop, and all this kind of stuff, and it was funded by the bank. So they had money, and they provided for us what we needed, and I was not in on the negotiations of this, but Danny was. So what he did, which was so smart, was when he negotiated his fee, he also said that he wanted the right to the film, they filmed it. And he wanted the rights to the film, the VHS, he wanted that. And they agreed to it. And they agreed, you know, now these were taken by their photographer that they brought in. And one of the running gags in the show was that Twinkle, her goal was to learn how to do magic so she could make presents for herself, and she was constantly making a list of these presents. So every time I entered, I had a list with me, and every time the list was longer and longer, and longer and longer, and then, you know, then the magic in it, for me, was very simple, you know, and I did a try and restore list. When I got frustrated, I tore up the list, and then I made it, you know, because of the scene that I did with Danny, it reappeared, right, and all these pieces, and the kids went nuts. They went nuts, and they loved our characters, and they loved, because I was failing a lot, you know, I did a drooping flower, because I was trying to make things grow, and I couldn't, and I was trying to make things come out of a magic hat, and every time it was something different and funny, like a rubber chicken, you know, so I did a lot of gaggy stuff, lots of gags. I did, you know, spring snakes, and we did the illusion I talked to you about with, you know, in the bag. We did that switch and stuff like that. And then we did metamorphosis. And we did boy to rabbit. Do you guys know boy to rabbit?
Mm-hmm.
We did the boy to rabbit illusion. So that's the illusion of boy to rabbit. Or girl to rabbit, whichever one we picked. This is the program from it, which was just this little flyer. And the first Chicago Center presents Danny Orleans and Mary Cranberry. And my name was not there. My name was only on a few things that said with Jan Rose, you know. But this was Danny, you know, and it was called Mary Cranberry. So we did that show together. And through all this stuff and having that tape, Dan put together a promo package. And we had this wonderful promo pack. And we sold the show, and we toured that show for 7 years.
Wow.
7 years.
Mary Cranberry.
Well, we had 2 versions of it. So when we got really fancy, we did this. Because this is how you sold yourself in those days. You had to have a brochure. You had to have a promo packet. You had to have a folder. You had to do mailings. You had to have an agent that helped you get the stuff out. And so we had a full color brochure about our show, you know, and this is what we used to sell ourselves. By then we were dating and married, but in the beginning we weren't, you know, we were just working together and banging out shows and trying to make this show successful. There were script rewrites and stuff to do, you know, because it was a mess. It was a new show. This came later, this came much later. So this is how I got into magic, you know, by going to that audition and working really hard on this silly show. And Dan and I found that we worked together so well, and we got along, and we were so comfortable with each other. We were very different. We had very different ways of approaching performing and different skills. But maybe that's what helped, you know, us balance. And this kids show was our life. And children's magic was all we did. We did children's magic for years. That's all Danny did. You know, Dan was a kids magician for a long, long time. He didn't start doing more adult sophisticated work till in the 90s. We made our living doing kids magic. This show, lots and lots of school shows, lots and lots of birthday party shows, special events, and then I even did a show, this is me, doing a children's birthday party. And I was in my 20s, and Dan had work that was coming in for really young kids for birthday parties. And he was like, I don't do an hour for 4-year-olds, that's crazy. But he didn't want to refuse the work, right? So he said, you know what, I'm gonna teach you a show that you're gonna do, that's 20 minutes, and then you're also gonna do a little puzzle with the kids, and you're gonna be Miss Magic, and you're gonna go out and take this work. And there was a lot of it. And the reason there was a lot of work for this young age is because it was when Mommy and Me classes were booming. And when Mommy and Me classes were booming, the mothers got to be friends. And so they were having their kids get together to do play dates. And then when the kids were 3 or 4 or 5, they would have birthday parties and the moms would get together. And they said, well, what can we do with our kids? Let's get a magician. Well, the moms didn't realize that these kids are 3 and 4. What are you gonna do with a 3 and a 4-year-old, right? They're young, they're babies, their attention span is very short. So Dan taught me a show. He said, you're a good storyteller, you're an actress. And I did Dinky the Dwarf. You know, I opened the show with, I opened the show with this Queen of Hearts. I still have the silk trick, where all my cards were Queen of Hearts. They're 4-year-olds. They didn't know that. So when I said pick a card, who was gonna say, oh, let me see the other one. Right, but they knew the symbol of what a Queen of Hearts looked like now. They had a Queen of Hearts. And all I did was open this big silk and they went crazy. They were like, oh. You know, they just thought it was so beautiful. Whether they knew that that was the same as the card, or whether they just thought the silk was pretty, who cares? They thought it was beautiful. And then I got on the floor with them and I did Dinky the Dwarf. You know, and I did that story with them. And I told, and it was like the fun little thing. You can't do that now. People would get upset. You know, because you're talking about a short person. All my material is gone. And then I did Forgetful Freddy too. I had Forgetful Freddy. And with the balloon and everything, I did the balloon. And I told the kids, you know, that it was gonna be loud. And I said, cover your ears if you don't like loud. You know, in Forgetful Freddy, the balloon breaks and the head's there. And it was really cool. And then I closed. My big closer was I took a magic hat and I had a kid hold it. And I had a dove bag. Sorry, Walter. It wasn't a dove appearance. It wasn't cool like you. But I had a dove bag with a zipper on it, and the dove was inside there. And I showed it empty by putting my hand through the other side, zipped it up, put it in the bag, and then made the dove appear. And the kids got to pet the dove. And then I did the geometric vanish puzzle with the 3 pieces. Oh, I should have brought one. Anyway, I did that for the kids, and they got to keep. So I started learning, and I started, you know, getting more into magic. But I was still doing theater. At the same time I was working the kids' shows, and the same time I was doing the touring show, and at the same time I was doing my Miss Magic show. I was charging $100 for a show. That was big money. I was so excited. I was thrilled. Are you kidding? I was in my little suitcase, you know, and my Dinky the Dwarf. I was so excited. But I did that. So then I got to meet. And I have a picture. I have so many pictures. I want to show you these pictures because they're very groovy.
You got a picture of Dinky the Dwarf?
No, but I'm going to show you. These are really good. So, I'm going to take these all
So
out.
we'll look at these pictures and then we'll come to the conclusion. How does that
Oh
sound, Jen?
no, oh God, I'm so sorry.
No, not at all.
You should have stopped me.
Oh no, we
Because
love
I didn't
Dinky
get
the
to any
Dwarf.
of the good things.
We'll have part 2. Part 2.
We'll have to have part 2.
Yeah, there you go.
This is a picture. So flash, you know, go fast forward. Danny introduced me to all these magic people, right? And this was the best part of my life. Because I met Eugene Berger and Tony and Druzy and Jane Marshall, right? And Max Maiden. And in this picture, look at this picture, you guys.
And if I'm right, Jay Marshall performed at your wedding, right?
That is a picture of one of the first invocationals. So Hiawatha and Manduka. Manduka are in there. Remember them? Hiawatha and Manduka? They're in there. And so then, but how did I get there? So Eugene said to me, Janice, you can't play Twinkle your whole life. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? And I said, I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna do. And here's Danny Lee and Jay Marshall. He was so good. He was so good to us. So, and this was the program from Invocational. So he said, I said, I don't know, Eugene. But Eugene and I hung out a lot. And Frances used to do these church basement things where she would, you know, do fundraisers for church basement. And she'd, you know, invite us to come. And she'd make Jay perform, you know, or Jay and his friends. So, do you know who Tommy Edwards is?
Yeah.
Tommy Edwards, anybody? Right?
I know the
So
name.
this is Tommy.
Yeah.
Right? Tommy Edwards. So, Tommy Edwards is the man, magic memory man. Don't forget it. So I went to this church basement event with Eugene. And Jay got up into trouble with it. And then he introduced Tommy. And Tommy did a memory act. And I went nuts. I went nuts. And I said to Eugene, that's what I want to do. I love this act. And he goes, really? This is what you want? I go, yeah. yeah, I have a good memory from dance and from theater. I love that act. And he said, oh, all right. So that's when Eugene talked to Jay, and Jay talked to Eddie Fields. Right, remember Eddie Fields?
Yeah.
Yep.
He's dead now, been dead a long
Yeah.
time. So Eddie was living in the suburbs of Chicago, right? And Eddie did a 2-person act, right? And Jay and Eddie were really good friends, but Eddie's partner, George, died.
Yeah.
Terrible accident, he fell.
Yeah.
It was bad. Anyway, so Jay said to me and Danny, you should learn this act.
Right.
And they connected us to Eddie. And that's how we learned our code act. It was from Eddie.
Wow.
So Eddie had nothing written down. Nothing. Oh God, nothing. And so we learned this act by talking to him. We met with him once, sometimes twice a week for over a year, almost 2 years. And we learned it from him. And eventually, he was the sender. So eventually, I could work with Eddie because he was the sender.
Yeah.
And then that went faster. We you know, because Dan could see. But Eddie's style was real different. Simultaneously, you know, Simon Aronson had this act, right?
Yeah.
And Simon used to go watch Eddie,
Right.
you know, perform. And so Simon was really good with me and helping me also because, you know, he really understood like what Eddie's goals were. And it's not the way Simon set up his act.
Right.
He didn't at all, because Eddie was invisible.
Right.
Eddie was a tiny man,
Yeah.
maybe 5.
He dressed up like the employee of Woolworths or whatever.
He wore a vest,
Yeah.
and he looked, and George was huge, tall,
Yeah.
and real, you know, and he was the professor.
Yeah.
And Eddie
He
would
was
be
the
like,
act.
welcome, you know, come in closer, everyone step in. Now he's coding,
He just looked like an employee of the.
he's coding
Yeah.
already. He's like ahead, cause he's looking at what are in people's bags. And he's looking at these people, and he's sending Eddie is sending George information. And so his style was so incredible and difficult because, you know, again, we were learning it without structure. He was kind of all over the place, you know, so it was just, and then all of a sudden I'd say, Eddie, I don't get it. This is like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. You gotta do, you know, and I'm like, oh, okay. So we learned that act, and, you know, no matter where we were, Jay, if we were at a party, we didn't have a community like this. It was like you just got lucky to go to a party or something, you know? But Jay was always at these parties, and he would make us get up and do something. So we were able to practice, you know? And then Dan was working a ton with still doing kid shows, but he also was involved in doing Sweet 16s. And he said, that's where we're gonna practice our act.
Sure.
So we practiced our act doing Sweet 16s, cause all those young girls,
Yeah.
and there were always a few older, you know,
Yeah.
siblings, they all had
In
purses,
their purses, yeah.
right? And so, you know, I got fluently comfortable, you know, learning to do the language. And we just built up from there. We weren't on our feet for a very long time. It took a long, long time, you know, to get on our feet. And to actually feel like you could do that act and feel like, you know, you could do a job and feel good about getting paid for it. It was not an easy thing to do, and you know that, you know, when you're doing a 2-person act, it's really difficult. But, you know, that's how I got into magic, and that's how I get into learning about, you know, I don't like to call it a code act, I like to call it a language. I like to see it as a language because I'm really big on semantics and how you you get your head and how you organize your head to think. And if you think of it as a language, it's gonna sound like a language. And that's what you wanna sound like. You don't wanna sound like you're speaking, that English isn't your first language. Like you have, you wanna speak as though you're an intelligently, grammatically structured person, who understands the English language. So, to cut to the present, I think that act was incredibly challenging because it was multitasking for me. And the way that it was structured, and the way we learned it, and the way we did it, the way we still do it, is that I'm on my feet. As soon as I hit that stage, it's happening. The code is coming. So I have to speak to the audience and enter the stage and look at Dan and say, thank you, honey. Well, thank you and welcome. My name is Dan Rose, and it's a pleasure for me to be here tonight. And depending on how I'm gonna begin the act, sometimes we open, if we're doing a lot of time, we'll open with serial number on a dollar bill, right? So I like to open with something that isn't super personal, but that is gonna prove your worth by doing it fast and fulfilling the promise of magic, right? I don't wanna talk too long. I wanna prove myself. So I like opening with something where right away, boom, 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 and that's why I love the math piece, which is one of the most difficult things to do. And I love, it's very hard, but very difficult piece. It's a lot harder than it looks, which every time you do that line where you say, I'm gonna do this again because it took me a long time to learn, and it went really fast. That's how the math piece is. That math piece is really difficult, and man, it is over. But it's such a great piece, because we do a lot of corporations or sales meetings or special events, or where you're introducing someone, and it's such the perfect piece to do. You get everybody involved, everybody's given a number, and then you turn around and you say, totally, 1,445, how did I do? You got it, proving that it all adds up with AMCO, and or whatever. Or now, to really tell you about the numbers, who really adds up the numbers, your accountant, and you're head of this, and you're head of that, please welcome to the stage, Joe Dokes. And so it's a great piece to do when you're introducing someone who's gonna do marketing, or who's gonna talk about numbers or something.
But it leaves people's heads spinning, it's just like, oh, fuck it.
Right, but what it does is, and that's what you want, you're hired to get up and be an entertainment interlude. You're hired to give them something.
Super impressive.
Right, and you wanna do that, you wanna have impact, and you wanna wow them, and, and I hope this is okay to say, but as a woman, I wanna get up and show I have some chops.
Yeah.
I don't wanna ever look like,
You're the assistant or whatever.
yeah, and I'm just here because my husband, wanted me to be in show business. That's not why I'm there. I'm there because I'm in show business since I'm 13 years old. Like you wanna have some chops up there and some worth. And so it was always very important to me to learn something really hard.
Right,
And it was always really important to me to learn something that would be respected in the industry. I wanted to learn something that's hard. And so I was very excited about the memory stuff. With the Code Act, and you know this inside and out, you're doing many things at once. You are talking to your audience, you're taking in information, you're watching and taking in code, and then you look, and now you're taking in more information, you're storing, and now you might do that piece of information later. Because, the beauty, I think, of doing an act that's a two-person act is to not get into the rhythm of sender talks, receiver talks, sender talks, receiver talks, sender talks, receiver talks. It becomes transparent. And you don't wanna do that. You wanna break up that information coming and going. You want, to make it look as though, you know, I can introduce pieces and I can do a lot of talking, and Dan's just kind of doing a few things, and before you know it, I have all this stuff I'm saying. Well, I got that a while ago, or I'm adding to it now.
Yeah.
You know, or I'm building on top of it. And so, what I had to learn to do in that act was much more difficult than what I had to put together what I do here.
Sure.
Because I have time here.
Yeah,
To-
yeah.
And
There's
I
not as
don't,
much of a misdirect there.
and I don't have to do, it's not a secret. So my persona here is that I am not saying I have a superpower. I'm a person who is your host. How are you? Welcome. What are you celebrating? I'm not getting information in a way that's deceptive. I'm just asking.
Yeah.
And just tell me,
Yeah.
what's your name?
Very forward pre-show.
Where are you from? Tell me all about it.
Yeah.
There's nothing to hide. It is so freeing. It is so freeing to do this. It's hard, but in a different way.
Yeah.
It's challenging, but in different ways.
Sure.
And it's freeing in so many other ways, you know, and
Jan, I have,
you gotta stop.
my phone is getting to 3%, and I don't wanna cut it off.
So,
We need a Jan part 2.
We need a jam part 2.
no, but
Yes.
you know what?
The first
You
one.
know, I do.
First act.
I do have
The beginning.
favorite books on memory that I love. I do have favorite, you know, methods that I love, that I think are good. The most important thing, I think, if you're interested in memory, is these methods are out there, you know, whether, you know, you do, like a Harry Lorraine thing, which is a picture of Harry Lorraine and Jay Marshall,
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
right?
Oh, cool.
Right, Harry just died.
Pink there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right? Movie, right? You know, but whether you do like a Harry Lorraine thing or a Bruno First, do you guys, anybody interested in that stuff? Anybody? Nobody. So nobody is. So his, you know, stuff, his whole memory course, Bruno First memory course, so it was a huge course that people took. And he talked about the fact that there was somebody that he worked with that had a brain injury. And so, do you know who Jim Quick is? Anybody? Jim Quick? No?
Sounds
So Jim Quick is a person that writes, he's present day contemporary person, and he wrote a book called Limitless, which is the
Right.
ability to use the mind and to learn information and to be able to use your mind in very powerful ways. And his book comes with a workbook, so if you get the book, get the workbook, because I think you have to rehearse this stuff. You have to practice it a lot. And in the beginning, you find yourself like, how do I practice this? You know, what do I do? Where do I go? How do I start? You know, so you need structure, and you need to be able to understand the same way you structure a magic trick, learning those elements of whether you're doing, you know, you're finding the aces or bringing cards to the top or knowing exactly where cards are or memorizing a stack. Those are just the things you learn to do, right? Those are very separate. When you do memory, what's also really important is that you learn what's gonna work for you as an individual. And it took me a long time to do that and to learn. A lot of other people call them associations.
Yeah.
I don't use that word, I say attachments.
Sure.
I use the word attachment because I say, what is gonna make that information attached to me? What is gonna make me hold it so that I am not gonna forget it? So that even after something
Right.
is done, you know, I can look at the grid in my mind and I can know that the Burrells were in
Yeah.
our mezzanine.
But it's personal.
You know, and Brittany was having a birthday, and Edward was on the first day, and Ashley is celebrating her baby move. You know, I can see that, I can see the
Yeah.
Chicago cabaret, and I know where all those people were, and who they are, and what they were celebrating.
Yeah.
And you wanna devise a plan that's gonna allow you to be able to do that. And you have to know yourself really, really well.
It has
This
to be
stuff is-
personal to you.
Yes. And so you can learn all these
Yeah.
techniques and stuff,
That's right.
but unless, these books I think are more important. Limitless, more important. Keep Sharp by Sanjay Gupta, more important. Subtract, did you ever read the book Subtract? It's about subtracting stuff from your brain so that you only see what you really wanna see. It's about being able to have your eyes open and see it as though, like in our code act, I took off the blindfold right early
Yeah.
because Max yelled at me and said, take off that blindfold. And he said, everybody wears a blindfold.
Right.
You're an actress, you have an expressive face, and you're covering your face.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Right.
You wanna connect to your audience, why would you cover your face? Take off that blindfold. And I said, I love it. Something different, I wanna be different. So I took off that blindfold, but what does it do? Now, your eyes are open. Now you can close your eyes, I guess, to look dramatic and think, but it's so much more dramatic to be staring at the person.
Yep.
The person's in the front row and be dealing with somebody that's over here and knowing all their information. To have your eyes open and to be looking at your audience is so much stronger. To still be able to connect with your audience while you're doing such strong material. So I learned another technique, which is the ability to see the material in your mind when your eyes are open. We do
Right.
that when our eyes are closed, right? We can, so you can
Yeah,
practice it, you
otherwise-
can close your eyes and you can say, okay, up in your brain, put the number 7, put the number 9, put the number 9, put the number 8. You know, now you see 7, 9, 9, 8, backwards 8, 9, 9, 7, forward 7, 9, 9, 8. You could see it. Now open your eyes and see 7,
Yeah.
9, 9, 8, and you just practice it so that you're seeing like that material with your eyes open.
Yeah.
And it's just another technique that helps you to memorize stuff very quickly, very fast, in a moment. You know, you don't have time.
Yeah.
Well,
when
Jen,
you're doing it
thank
to
you
Yeah.
so much for everything. I don't want to stop because my phone will die. But
So, thank you for listening.
we have to do part 2. You know?
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Give it up one more time for Jen Rose. Woo!